Hey everybody, welcome to BrickVault. Today's custom build is from Rick and Morty. We have Rick's ship, and believe it or not, the design this time around has actually come from myself. Been a big fan of Rick and Morty for quite a long time. It's awesome sci-fi, animated really well, the characters are likable, and it's pretty darn funny. The multiverse is endless amounts of fun to explore, and Rick's ship is the ultimate vehicle to take it anywhere you might want to go. Before I jump into the larger details of this model and how it came to be, I first do want to say that if you wanted to get the building instructions, you can find them at our web store, www.brickvault.toys. Included with each purchase is the PDF step-by-step building guide, as well as a digital parts list so you can upload them and order online quickly and easily. Included with these files is an alternate build to add the flag to the back of the ship like you saw from episode 1, and there's also some alternate ways you can create the Rick and Morty minifigs if that's what you wanted to do as well. If building more advanced and detailed custom Lego models is your thing, or you think you might want to try it out, I highly recommend you check us out in the description below. You can click it right there at the top. Any and all support from you guys is always greatly appreciated. Now let's jump into the actual details. For you longtime viewers of the channel, you might have noticed that this is indeed an updated build. I made my first version of Rick's ship a little over 2 years ago, and even then that's just when the video was made. I think I had a prototype close to 3 years back. The only real similarity between the original and the one you're looking at now is that curved saucer shape is made with somewhat similar pieces, though some of the dimensions have changed, which I think makes it a little bit more proportional, easier to construct, and ultimately it looks, well, I think it looks a lot better. The idea was I wanted to improve the looks across the board from my original version, and what ended up happening was I completely fundamentally gutted the entire insides of the ship and also completely redid the engines a few times in order to come away with a design that I thought looked better and was also easier to construct. In order to achieve the look that I got with that saucer shape, there is a little bit of bending and bowing to some of the bricks in a minor way, but there is no single point of high tension on any of these connections where it feels like some of these bricks might pop away, or you have to push extremely hard to get anything to snap into place. Rick's ship also comes on an adjustable stand, which I had a lot of fun making. Once again, it was also a little bit more of a complex design initially, and then I just sort of stripped it down to its bare basics, which ultimately I think looks a little bit better, and it's also easier to operate. You can tilt it from side to side. It can cant relatively sharp, not super sharp, and then of course you can have it rest in the center, and while it sits in the middle there's still plenty of friction to keep it there so it's not just going to wobble from one side to the other. The stand connects into that half dome at the bottom of the ship, which is also detachable, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, so let me focus on the external details at the top, and then we'll work our way into the handling and modifying section of the video kind of towards the end. So at the very front of the ship, Rick has some headlights. Those are basically just flashlights duct taped to the top of the ship. Before, I had a piece that I think looked like kind of the perfect flashlight piece, but the connection to the ship was ultimately too distracting, and then the gray modified 1x1 bar clip that took its place for the main connection actually didn't exist when I first designed the ship, so I'm really glad that that piece came out because it definitely ties the front bit of the build together in a much cleaner way. Now, when it comes to the engines, some of you might be scratching your heads. Lego does make trash can pieces, and Rick's ship engines look like trash cans, or perhaps are built inside of old trash cans. So naturally, it makes sense that you might want to build it with those pieces, but this playscale version of Rick's ship that I've made here just doesn't work with those small trash can pieces. They're way too tiny compared to the rest of the ship size, and I wanted to build it this big, so I had to make something that wouldn't stick out in a weird way and be way too small. What we're looking at now is the fourth fundamentally different design of a slightly upscaled trash can build that I went through. There were a lot of different things that had to work for this build, so the design process took probably more time here than any other single spot. Ultimately, I still wanted it to look like a trash can and an engine, but also connect to the ship in a really strong way, and so you didn't have to play around with its weird angle too much, because the base connection point is just with some old ribbed tubing. In several episodes, you'll see that Rick's ship has a connection between the engine and the actual sides of the saucer paneling. So I took advantage of that and I made that point the primary connection. And then the golden hose is just a little bit of detailing, and in fact pushes out against the engine ever so slightly instead of connecting it and pulling it in. At the end of the day, this part of the build is easy to construct, and you don't have to play around with the angle of the engine every time you pick up the model, which is basically what I did with the other 3 iterations of the build. Now, when I said earlier that I fundamentally changed the design of the ship, a lot of that had to do with the addition of the round corner bricks that make this rim underneath the windscreen. This is a detail that I completely overlooked the first time, and by adding it here, I think it makes the overall shape of the vehicle feel a lot more solid. This rounded bit is actually slightly longer than it is wide, which makes for a very finicky and interesting set of connections deep inside the ship with a combination of different jumper pieces here and there. And ultimately, yeah, this was a pretty big challenge, but it felt good to completely destroy everything about my original build and come at it from a totally different direction. At the end of the day, the windscreen is attached very strong, and the interior has plenty of space to fit both Rick and Morty and a ton of just gross, nasty bottles and bottle caps all over the floor. I took extra special care to make sure that it's all studded in, there's no loose pieces, and if you look closely, there's a couple of little Easter eggs here and there based on 1 or 2 of the episodes. The control modules in the front of the ship are built in a similar style. They're very, very close together, very tightly knit, but the idea here was to try to fit as much detail as possible into this relatively small cockpit. Now I suppose it is time to get into the handling section of this build. First and foremost, you can see it driving around, or sorry, you can roll it around on the ground pretty easily. There's a decent amount of weight for the size of the saucer, and though the wheels are small, that extra weight means you can push it and it'll roll for just a bit longer than maybe what you might initially guess. On top of it being able to roll around, the handling is rough enough to the point where you feel comfortable rolling it as well. Also, I figure this is a good time to mention it, but yes, you'll notice that Rick's ship has 4 wheels instead of 3, which is how you see it in the show. Personally, I just like the look of the ship better with 4 wheels, but if you want to have the more accurate look, all you have to do is break the back 2 wheels off, add these 3 pieces, switch over one of those wheels, and the ship rolls around just fine like it did before. The stability feels honestly pretty much exactly the same. So anyways, real quick, that is totally an option for you guys. It's also included for the parts list to switch around if you like. When I pick it up, you'll notice that I can pick it up from every single little extremity that you can think of. The side panels for the saucer are fair game. You can even pick the ship up by either of the engines. The hinges obviously bend a little bit, but there's no actual braking happening. The windscreen works as a pickup point, and truly it feels like a very, very casual model to handle. On the underside, you'll see that the dome has actually disappeared off the ship. You can pop all 4 corners of these round bricks back on. There's just a couple of half pin pieces that connect it directly into the bottoms of the plates. And once it's all there, obviously the wheels don't touch the ground, but when you look at screenshots of this ship in universe while it's flying, that part of the dome just naturally hangs well below the wheel line anyways. I think it folds into the ship at some point while it lands. So anyways, you can attach it relatively easily to get the full complete shape of the ship back together. And technically you don't have to put it on the stand here. You can still sort of rest on the ground. The center weight is right there in the middle anyways, but I definitely prefer to have the ship resting on the stand. You get a little bit of a better look at the total shape once it's on here. It studs into the 4 studs at the bottom of the dome, and the weight here is almost perfect perfectly distributed to the center. The lip of the stand cuts forward, I think just by an extra stud or two, and that helps mitigate the forward weight ever so slightly, but when you see me knocking this thing around, it's actually a pretty solid little build. The dome connects strong enough to the top of the stand, so when you cant the ship side to side, there is very little chance of the ship actually breaking away from the stand. You'd really have to kind of jerk it hard from one side to the other in order to create enough force to break it away from those studs. And then quickly, this isn't part of the handling section necessarily, but there is the alternate configuration here with the original flag like I mentioned earlier. This was kind of a fun little afterthought. I see that a lot of people that end up making this model love to include the flag, though personally it's just not an aesthetic. I don't think of Rick's ship with the flag on it because it was only there for the pilot episode, so it's not something that is quite as familiar to me. But I think the aesthetic of having it on actually does kind of even out the overall look, and I don't mind keeping it on. I designed it to make it quite easy to modify the flag coming on or off, so if you want it, go for it. If you don't want it, go for it. And I could have made custom printable stickers on the side of the ship here to show some of his bumper stickers, but instead I just made a very quick and easy visual representation of just sort of some of those colors that you might see on one of the panels. In terms of baseline details and features, I suppose that's everything I've got to say about Rick's ship. It was pretty fun tackling this model several times over the course of, I think, 3 years, and I feel like I'm finally at a point with this design where I feel pretty good about it through and through. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. It's a lot of fun sharing my creations with you guys. Let me know what you think about this model. Remember, if you wanted to build it, you can find the instructions at our web store, www.brickvault.toys. And I know I don't have to ask, but also let me know what types of builds you'd like to see us doing in the future. Custom building is really where it's at for us right now here in the studio, and we're having a blast just knocking out some of the creations that we're really interested in. So thanks again for watching, everyone. If you enjoy our content, you can always like or subscribe, and we'll see you next time at BrickVault.